So, one of the biggest questions that you get in the abuse community is whether an abuser can change. And the thing is, it's a Schrodinger's answer because it could be any of the answers until you open the box to see what you're looking at. So if I'm talking to a victim of abuse who's in active abuse, the answer is no. No, this abuser cannot change. This abuser will not change. If they go off and start dating somebody, or they're dealing with someone different and they seem to be treating that person, whether it's a friend or whomever, better than you, that's not your business. And just assume that they're just masking until they have the opportunity to abuse that person. However, if you are an abuser and someone who has abused, then you should know, yes, an abuser can change. That change, though, happens over a very long period of time. And it's not as easy as making a decision that, oh no, I've realized I'm an unsafe person and now I want to stop abusing. So I'm going to decide to stop abusing. Because the reason someone is abusing another person is that they have mental thought processes, ideas, beliefs, unreasonable entitlements that they believe gives them permission to act the way they are, to do what they're doing. So if you are that person, you're going to have to undo the threads of all of these beliefs that have given you permission in your mind to treat somebody the way you're treating them. If you are a person who was a victim of abuse and then has now gone on to be an unsafe person, which happens, you also need to know that yes, an abuser can change. But just like, the previous, just abuser we were talking about, it's going to take time. And if you are in that situation, the reason you've been abusive is likely because you have maladaptive coping mechanisms from being abused, in order to protect ourselves in an unsafe situation. Like, you can't stay healthy. You can't stay safe in an unsafe situation, because doing what healthy people do just puts you more at risk. And so this is how victims of abuse end up becoming the worst versions of themselves. Because if you stay the best version of yourself, you're going to be destroyed. And so instead of being destroyed, we end up kind of warping our souls in order to deal with this person who is trying to destroy us. Even if that's not what they think they're doing, they might think that, they're right and they're helping or whatever it is. But somebody who's deciding to power over you at your expense for their benefit, no. So that's an inappropriate use of power. It's just, and also you don't necessarily have that power. Again, it's all very context dependent. Who is involved here? What are any obligations that we might have toward each other? So for example, a parent has an obligation to a child to power over them in a sense, but it's for their benefit, not the parent's benefit. It's at the parent's expense for the child's benefit. So anyway, this is an extremely complex thing to answer. And so victims of abuse, while they're in the dynamic, with the parent, with the partner, with the friend, they desperately want to believe that this person can change, and that if they just do something, they can cause that person to change. But the only thing that can really cause that person to change is the thing that they don't want to do, which is leave. So we're in society, and this is how we learn and get feedback. When we experience consequences for our actions, we learn a direct corollary. If I treat someone this way, I'm going to get this response. And often victims have been talked out of responding appropriately, or have talked themselves out of responding appropriately. And so abuse really thrives in that space where an abuser doesn't experience the consequences of their own actions. And so fundamentally, for that abuser to even have a chance at changing, they have to start experiencing the consequences. And the primary consequence of being abusive is for the person they're abusing to no longer be available, and for them to no longer get the benefits that come along with abusing that person. Because there are benefits to abusing a person. You get to hijack their resources, their friend group, their reputation, their character. You might be able to use them to uphold a fantasy, magical thinking belief that you're an amazing, great person, or that you are the best, smartest, most superior, whatever form whatever the form of the abuse takes. It's reliant on other people upholding this false reality, and how they uphold that false reality is by acting as if what the abuser wants to be true is true. And it's not. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to force people into it. So when you're the victim and you desperately want that person to be different, because in your mind, this is an aberration, it's not who they are. Unfortunately, you're operating off a false premise, which is that this isn't who this is, that they haven't given themselves permission to harm you. The longer you stay in this dynamic, the more justification they're going to have, because you're not going to be able to act perfectly. And then they're going to use that as reasons for why they can harm you. The only answer for a victim of abuse is that no, an abuser cannot change, and that you have to leave. And even if they did change, it would literally be like a decade plus. There are very few occasions where I've seen abusers stop abusing, and not like seek out new victims. One, it just may be opportunity. If you've, let's say, become a homosexual, and people stop taking you in and stop giving you the benefit of the doubt, stop paying for things for you, stop respecting you in the way that you want, you're not going to have access to people like you used to. Or I've seen abusers get older, and so they stop abusing, sometimes because they no longer, let's say, they're no longer an adult over a minor child. It could also be that they have less of these hormones. So if there's somebody who their body is hijacked by something like testosterone or too much estrogen or whatever it is, there are some people who have a biological processing issue, with their hormones, that can lead them to be very abusive. And so as they get older, that may change. It could get worse. It could get better. Sometimes they get dementia and they get nicer. So that might be a very old abuser. Or very, very rarely, somebody then does realize, oh no, I've been unsafe. I've hurt people. I was abusive, and I wish I wasn't like that. And so then they do the work to change. And that change takes years and years and years and years. By the time they've changed, they're remotely not even the same person that they were before. Because in order to change, you have to change the way that you think. So if you are wanting an abuser to change, your answer is no. If you are wanting yourself to change, the answer is possibly. If you put in the work, you develop the self-awareness, you figure out a way to undo your shame avoidance so you can really look at what you're doing, and then making better choices in the future. And our Raised by Narcissists, they sort of approach this, for victims who have gone on to be unsafe people and possibly abused others. They approach this, they call it fleas, that you get fleas from an abuser, in the sense of if you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And that's not really the model I use, but I know it's helpful for a lot of people. The model I use is that you cannot be healthy and stay healthy with an unhealthy person. You're not going to be yourself. So as you are trying to maintain this relationship, and you're doing it in ways that aren't safe, because you might not know what safety is, or you may have mislearned lessons from an abuser or been programmed in a different way. And so you have to realize you're like a loaded gun. And what do we do with guns? We don't leave them out. We don't give them like 5 chances to not, blow someone's head off again. We put them away so they're not able to harm another person. So the first thing that you have to recognize, if you're the person who's been a victim and is now harming other people, is you have to recognize that like you're not safe, not a safe person. And the first thing that you have to do is not even whether or not you can change. The first thing is to figure out how to be safe, how to ensure you do not continue to do these behaviors. And interestingly, that's like the first step to making that change. But you have to recognize reality, deal with what is as it is, make your choices based off that. The closer you can get aligned to reality, the closer you can understand what's actually happening and what your role really is, the better a chance you have of enacting that change. And that's because that you're developing self-awareness. Many abusers are not self-aware. They're unintentionally abusing people because their version of reality, these other people aren't even really people sometimes. Whatever the iteration of it is, they're the center of everything. And therefore, they are the arbiter of reality, and they decide whether something's good or bad. Or they've become the center of the universe. They are not accountable to anybody but themselves, and they'll never hold themselves accountable because they have no self-awareness. It's the self-delulu firewall, pew, 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 that shoots anything down that tries to get in. So, do people change? Yes. But you can't change people. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.